Okay, so we begin today by just briefly talking about the quiz. So first of all, I've got some statistics up here on the sideboard. The mean was 88. That means we add up all of the quiz scores and divide by the number of students that took the test. The median is 90. That's the middle if we lined everybody up in order. So half of you did better than 90, half of you did lower than 90. 90 is a very high median, and that's great. I'm quite content with that, and I expect many of you are happy with your scores. Not to put a damper on things, but I do want to say that quiz 1 is the easiest of all the quizzes and tests we take for the whole semester. So the grades tend to be lower. That's usually the highest average, but I'm not complaining about it. It is a very good average. I do want to point out that many people do not know how to add fractions. And it's not something we've talked about in this class. It's considered prerequisite material. But I got to say that if you don't know how to add 3/4 and 2/7, then in a little while, you're going to have no chance of adding 3/4 x and 2/7 x. And you're also going to have no chance of solving an equation like 3/4 x plus 2/7 x equals 3. Even no matter how good you are at the algebra, if you can't do the arithmetic, the algebra has no chance of happening. And so if you can't do the arithmetic, my guess is that you've lost points on many quizzes and tests throughout your mathematical career because you can't handle the fraction stuff. And at some point, you got to just decide, I'm done losing points because I don't know how to handle fractions, or I'm done losing points because I don't know how to handle negative numbers. So, you know, we are not spending any more class time talking about the arithmetic side of things. But you got some work to do if you got number 1 wrong, and if you got any parts of number 2 wrong. You know, the arithmetic is a prerequisite. You got to be able to do it in order to deal with the algebra that is coming. Okay. In terms of checking your work, so I have an answer key here, which I'm just going to pass around, and I'll take this back at the end of class. But you can just have a quick look, and I will say that this answer key exists in 2 places for you. You remember in the Math Studio where you looked at the letters from previous students? On that same table is a binder that has the answer key to this quiz. So you can just go to the Math Studio anytime and check out the answer key. I just want to point out there are 7 different versions of this quiz. If you guys look at the top of your quiz, I think it says V7 up there. You see that? Or does it say V7? Right below your name. See, it says V7. So when you go look up the answer key, make sure you are looking at the correct version of this quiz. All right? The answer key also exists in the library. If you go to the main desk in the library and ask them for the Math 095 folder, they've got it sitting behind their desk, and it has the answer key as well. Okay, so you can check out the answer key. I encourage you to hold on to these things. I've put hole punches in them so that you can put it in your binder and have it to study for when you take the first test and future tests and quizzes. One other thing, I'm just going to say I have a few extra copies, blank copies of the quiz that you took. So I'm just going to put them here, and at the end of class, if you want one, you can just grab one if you want a blank one to try again. I don't have enough for everybody, otherwise I would just pass them around. One more thing about the quiz. This right here projected on the board is our syllabus, and I'm going to tell you about a policy that if you didn't read the syllabus, then you don't know about, and some of you will be very happy to learn about right now. If you do better on an exam than on the quiz before it, let me just pause and say, we have quiz 1 you just took. Soon we will have exam 1. Then we'll have quiz 2 and exam 2, and quiz 3 and exam 3. So they come in pairs. If you do better on an exam than on the quiz before it, I will replace your quiz score with your exam score. So if you got a quiz score that's great, super. But if you got one that you're not too happy about, it is not written in my grade book in pen right now. It is in pencil because it could change. So if you got, let's say you got a 70 on this quiz and you get a 75 on the first test, then I will cross off the 70 on the quiz and I will put 75, and it will be like this quiz never happened, right? So you do have an opportunity if you made some mistakes on the arithmetic side of things. You have an opportunity at exam 1 to improve this quiz score, okay? All right, and that happens throughout the semester. Any exam can replace the quiz right before it. Okay, so I think that is all of the announcement stuff. Good, okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is one problem from last night's homework, which a few folks had some questions about. So let's take a look. Did everybody get their quiz back? I think we got everybody. Oh, Sarah. Okay, so the question here, one of the questions for this triangle was to estimate the perimeter. And remember perimeter, so area means count the boxes on the inside. It's how much space is inside. But perimeter means how far would you have to walk if you walked around the shape, right? And so, okay, it's easy enough to find the length of the bottom side. How long is that? 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You just count. Okay, so the bottom side is 8, but it is very difficult to count the lengths of the other two sides because they don't go right along the grid. They go off at an angle, and so I can't look at it and count like how many boxes it hits or anything like that, like I could on the bottom side. So here's what we're going to do on problems like this. It's going to be estimation, which is fine, but essentially you're going to make your own ruler. And so you take a blank piece of paper, any piece of paper, and I'd like you to do this now, actually, if you have this in front of you, is you just find any old piece of paper. And I'm going to say that this is my piece of paper here. And you just put the piece of paper so that you stick one corner on one side of the triangle here. And then make one of the, yeah, in the homework problem. Yeah. So you just want to put the piece of paper there so that the one edge of the piece of paper goes right along that bottom side of the triangle. And then it's, now that it's lined up, you're going to make your ruler, and you're just going to write on your piece of paper where these little hash marks are. So you're just going to put a hash mark right there on each of these lines. And you're going to say, okay, it's 8 altogether. And that's how we can make a ruler. And it's not going to be perfect. And no matter what we do here, it's an estimate, and that's okay. And then once you've got your ruler, you can then take your piece of paper and pick it up and swing it over to one of these diagonal sides and estimate how long each of the sides is. Anybody have an estimate for either of the other two sides? And was it a little more or a little less than 5? Around 5.5. Something around 5. Anybody else get numbers that are in the ballpark? 6 for which one? The longer one? For the shorter one, you got 6. All right, 7. So I don't think we could be off by that much. So somebody's miscounting. So I've got to vote for a 5 and a 6 for over here. Which one? What do we have for the short one? 3.5. Yeah, so let's be clear. When we're counting these things, you got to make sure you start counting at the right one. I mean, 0 didn't get a line. So the first line here is 1, and then 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 8, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so there's some wide variation in the answers, and it's okay to have some variation because it's an estimate, but we shouldn't have as wide a variation as we have here. So during class, this is not the most important thing for today. So during class today, I'll walk around and just check in with you guys about this idea of using the ruler. So I'll come around and we can talk about that later. But for right now, let's move on to the more important stuff for today. So we are on page 47 in the big blue packet. Okay, two quick things up here in the demo section. If the course feels too fast or too difficult, it is still possible to switch into Math 094, which is something in between the Math 090 and this class. It's still possible to do it this semester. Ask me if you are at all thinking about doing it. We can talk about what that would mean. And if you're doing everything you can to succeed, but still aren't getting the results you want, maybe check out this folder called Study Ideas inside of our Moodle page. Okay, so we go to the objective. Lily. Okay, so what you're going to do right now is these two problems on this page, you're going to do them in your groups, and then we're going to come back together and work on some stuff as a class. But see how far you guys can get on 1 and 2, and I will walk around. Okay, so we're just going to group back together very briefly, and then you'll continue on in the classwork. All of the stuff that you guys just did in those two problems is fairly well written out here at the top of page 48. So you can review that later on. We're not going to read it to each other right now. I'm just going to point out this one little cutesy thing. The question is, which variable is dependent and which variable is independent? And it's just vocabulary when it boils down to it. But you guys have this equation up here, right? This W equals 10H. That's an equation that you just wrote. So, W or H, which one is independent, which one is dependent? Sarah, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you say the thing you just said about the time and the money? The wage depends on how many hours you actually work. That seem fair? How much you get paid depends on how many hours you work. So if I'm thinking about which one to call the dependent variable, is it wage or is it time? It feels like it's the wage. The wage depends on the number of hours. So that seems great. Here's something that I made up. I don't know if it will help you, but we're just gonna run through it here. Dwight, if it helps. What do we think? DEP, dep, dependent. Just picture him by himself. Whichever letter is by itself is the dependent one, right? It might help some of you, might not help all of you, but if it helps, you can use it. So together, we're just going to quickly look at this thing here at the bottom, this diagram. And even though you have a copy of it in front of you, I'm going to ask you to look at the version on the board, which is color coordinated, and there's information in the color on the board. So W equals 10H. We've just decided that W is the dependent variable. It's by itself, and as Sarah put so well, the money you get depends on how many hours you work. So H is the independent variable. We've got here in purple the one that's alone. We talked about that. We always put the independent variable first and the dependent variable second when you're writing a table. Whether it's a horizontal table like this one or a vertical, independent is always first. If it helps, the I kind of looks like a 1, independent and first, put it first. And then when you're writing things as an ordered pair, so you can plot points and draw a graph like you did, again, the independent one comes first. We're consistent. The independent one comes first in the table, and it comes first when you write it as an ordered pair. Those two numbers, by the way, are each called coordinates. And then finally, when we graph them, the horizontal is the independent variable, and the vertical is the dependent variable. And one thing that Caroline and Amy just came up with here was that if you think about the word horizontal and you think about the word independent, because that's what we're saying goes together, then the first two letters here are H and I, which are right next to each other in our alphabet, right? So when you're graphing, HI, horizontal goes with independent, okay? So if you need more detail, like I said, it's kind of spelled out up above. I'm going to ask you guys to spend, we've got now 30 minutes left in class. This is a long classwork section, so it's going to take concerted effort for the next 30 minutes. See how far you guys can get. Raise a flag if you get stuck. Together. So here in number 4, your car's gas mileage is 20 miles per gallon. Define variables and create an equation. These are going to be words that maybe you dread at this point, but hopefully you'll get more comfortable with throughout the course of the semester. For the distance you can drive in terms of the amount of gas you have. Distance in terms of gas. So it is very tempting to try to just write an equation. But we can't write an equation yet because we have no variables defined. So you might immediately in your head have these letters that stand for stuff, but it's so crucial, I think, to get the letters and what they stand for up here first so that we have a chance at writing a correct equation. Now the problem is telling me that one of the letters had better be distance. So that seems like a good place to start. Let D equal distance, but then we're going to make sure we put a good quantity word there, a good unit word, I should say, at the end. And miles is the word that we are measuring, is the unit we're measuring distance in. And that's one of them, and then I'll underline in blue in terms of the amount of gas. Amount of gas. Perfect, it writes itself. I just need a letter. How about G? Amount of gas. And I think it's important not just to put gas. Gas is not a quantity. Gas is not something that you measure. Amount of gas is something that you measure. But the word's already there. I just have to copy it. In, what are the units that we are measuring gas in? Is gallons. That's what the units are in this problem. And then we can play our game where we circle and underline and circle and underline, okay? We spent that time talking about quantities and units so that we'd be able to write down, we'd be able to invent variables and define them like we have here. And then once we've got that written down, some of you guys were able to just immediately go to the equation. If you aren't, here's a really, really important, a really useful tip. Just make up a number for one of these things. Suppose that I just said that I have 3 gallons of gasoline. How far can I drive? I can go 60 miles, right? I get 20 miles to the gallon. So if I have 3 gallons, I can go 60. What did we do? You took the 3, you multiplied it by 20, and it told you the distance, 60 miles. So just generalizing that, the distance is 20 times the number of gallons that you have, and that's the equation, okay? Okay, back to wherever you were, and in a few minutes I'll interrupt you again when it's time for the quick check. Let's see how far you can get until then.